He took the house, the money, everything in the divorce. But what he took ruined his life in a way he never expected. The day the divorce became a battlefield is burned into my memory in a way no celebration or holiday ever could be. It didn't start with shouting or slammed doors. It started quietly, almost politely, in a lawyer's office that smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. My husband sat across from me, calm, confident, already dressed like someone who had won. He didn't look at me as a wife anymore. He looked at me like a problem he was about to solve. When the papers were placed on the table, I felt my chest tighten, not because I didn't expect them, but because I suddenly realized how prepared he was. He had been planning this long before I ever suspected anything was wrong. As the conversation moved forward, I understood very quickly that this wasn't going to be a fair fight. He had already spoken to attorneys, already moved money, already documented everything in a way that made him look like the reasonable one and me like an emotional liability. Every word he spoke was calm, rehearsed, and cold. Meanwhile, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the shock of realizing that the man I trusted most had turned our marriage into a strategy game, and I was the losing side. When negotiations began, he pushed hard and without hesitation. The house, the savings, the investments, even items that held no real monetary value, but deep emotional meaning, he wanted it all. And disturbingly, he was getting it. Each agreement felt like a piece of my life, being boxed up and handed over while I sat there nodding, trying to keep my composure. I remember thinking that if I cried, I would lose more. So I swallowed everything. The anger, the betrayal, the urge to scream that this wasn't what marriage was supposed to be. Outside that office, the world kept moving. People went to work. Cars passed by. Life continued like nothing monumental had just collapsed. But inside me, something had shifted permanently. I wasn't just losing a marriage. I was losing the version of myself that believed love was protection. The battlefield wasn't only legal anymore, it was emotional, psychological, and deeply personal. Every conversation with him after that felt like another skirmish. Emails were weapons. Silence was punishment. Compromise was weakness. By the end of that first day, I realized something terrifying and clarifying at the same time. This divorce was not about ending a relationship. It was about winning, about control, about proving dominance, and he was determined to walk away with everything, even if it meant stripping me down to nothing. I went home to an empty house that no longer felt like mine, sat on the floor, and understood that the fight had only just begun. He didn't just walk away from the marriage. He walked away like a man collecting trophies. By the time the settlement was finalized, it felt unreal how much he had managed to take and how easily the system seemed to hand it to him. The house we built together, the one where I had painted the walls and memorized every creak in the floor, was signed over without hesitation. He kept the accounts, the investments, the retirement funds, and even the emergency savings we had once promised never to touch unless life fell apart. Ironically, life had fallen apart, and he still claimed it all. What hurt the most wasn't just the money. It was the confidence with which he did it. He sat there composed, nodding along as if this outcome was simply logical. He framed it as responsibility, as if taking everything was proof that he was the stronger, smarter one. I watched him speak about fairness, while the balance of power was so obviously tilted that fairness had become a joke. Every signature felt like confirmation that my contribution to the marriage had been invisible, unrecorded, and ultimately disposable. Friends later asked why I didn't fight harder, why I didn't push back or demand more. What they didn't see was how exhausted I already was. Months of tension, gaslighting, and quiet manipulation had drained me before we ever reached a courtroom. He knew exactly when to apply pressure and when to act reasonable. He knew how to make me doubt my own memory, my own worth, my own right to ask for anything more. By the time the final documents were in front of me, I just wanted it to end. And he used that. Walking out of the office that day, he looked lighter, almost relieved. He smiled in a way I hadn't seen in years. Like someone stepping into a future he had already imagined. Meanwhile, I was calculating how long my remaining savings would last, where I would live, how I would explain this to my family without sounding like I had failed. He had taken the lifestyle, the stability, and the image of success we once shared, leaving me with uncertainty and questions that had no immediate answers. Yet, beneath his pride and victory, there was something unsettling about how much he wanted to win. He didn't just want security. He wanted proof that he was right and I was replaceable. The house wasn't just property. It was a symbol. The money wasn't just currency. It was validation. He walked away with everything tangible, wearing his success like armor, completely unaware that in his rush to claim it all, he was also taking something far heavier than he realized. At the time, it looked like total defeat on my side and absolute triumph on his. Anyone watching from the outside would have agreed. He had the keys, the accounts, the control, and I had nothing but silence, a few boxes of personal belongings, and the hollow echo of a life that had been dismantled piece by piece. What no one could see, yet especially him, was that this apparent victory carried a cost that wouldn't reveal itself right away. What he didn't realize, not for a second, was that he hadn't just taken possessions and paperwork with him when he walked away. Along with the house, the money, and the comfort of a familiar life, he had unknowingly taken responsibility for things he had never truly handled before. During our marriage, I had been the quiet force behind everything running smoothly. I managed the schedules, remembered deadlines, handled family obligations, and absorbed emotional burdens without ever making them visible. To him, it looked like life simply worked. When he took everything, he also took the weight of maintaining it, and he was completely unprepared for that reality. At first, he enjoyed the illusion of independence. He posted photos from the house as if it were a fresh start, a symbol of freedom. But slowly, the cracks began to show. Bills went unpaid because no one reminded him. Appointments were missed because no one organized them. Relationships with extended family became strained because I was no longer smoothing over conflicts or remembering birthdays and important events. These weren't things he noticed while we were married. But without me, their absence became impossible to ignore. More importantly, he took with him the emotional energy he had always relied on without acknowledging it. I had been his buffer against stress, his sounding board, his silent support system. When things went wrong, I was the one who absorbed his frustration so he could move forward unbothered. Once I was gone, that frustration had nowhere to go but inward or outward, and neither direction was healthy. Friends started pulling away. Work pressures felt heavier. Small problems became overwhelming because there was no longer anyone quietly fixing them behind the scenes. What he truly failed to understand was that control without partnership is isolating. He had wanted power, and he got it, but power came without warmth, without understanding, and without forgiveness. The house echoed in ways it never had before. The silence he once craved became uncomfortable, even oppressive. He had mistaken my presence for background noise. Never realizing it was the structure holding his world together. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened to me. In losing everything material, I gained clarity. I could see, for the first time, how much of myself I had poured into maintaining a life that no longer included me. The exhaustion lifted slowly, replaced by a quiet sense of awareness. I wasn't weak for walking away with less. I had simply stopped carrying a load that was never shared. He believed he had taken my stability, my security, and my future. In reality, he had taken my labor, my patience, and my silence. And those were the very things that had protected him from his own shortcomings. As the days passed, it became clear that what he thought was a victory was actually a transfer of burdens he didn't know existed. By the time he began to feel their weight, it was already too late to undo what he had taken or to give back what he had never valued until it was gone. The consequences didn't announce themselves loudly or arrive with drama. They crept in slowly, almost politely, slipping into his life in ways that were easy to ignore at first. A growing sense of irritation, sleepless nights, a constant feeling that something was off. Even though on paper, he had everything he fought for. He told himself it was temporary, just an adjustment period. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and that uneasy feeling never left. The house he had been so proud to win started to feel different. Too quiet, too empty. The silence wasn't too peaceful. It was heavy. There was no one reminding him of small things. No one grounding him when stress piled up. Problems that once felt manageable now felt overwhelming. Repairs went undone. Paperwork stacked up. He found himself exhausted by tasks he never even noticed before. The life he took control of required constant effort, and there was no one left to share the load. His relationships began to suffer next. Friends who once enjoyed his company noticed his impatience, his sharp tone, his inability to listen. Conversations became transactional, rushed, shallow. He complained often, but never reflected. People slowly created distance, not out of anger, but out of discomfort. He couldn't understand why invitations stopped coming or why calls went unanswered. He told himself people were unreliable. He never questioned his own role in the growing isolation. At work, the pressure intensified. Without emotional support, stress followed him home instead of dissolving at the end of the day. Small setbacks felt personal. Criticism felt like attacks. He worked longer hours, not to succeed, but to avoid being alone with his thoughts. Success no longer felt satisfying, it felt necessary, just to justify everything he had taken and everything he had lost. Dating didn't help. New connections felt hollow. He brought control into places that required vulnerability and wonder. People sensed the imbalance immediately. Conversations stayed surface level. Intimacy never deepened. Each failed attempt reinforced his frustration, but never his understanding. He wanted companionship without compromise, connection without accountability, love without sacrifice, and it never lasted. Meanwhile, the life he had dismantled continued without him. I rebuilt quietly, steadily, without chaos. The peace I found wasn't dramatic, but it was real, and that contrast made his internal unrest impossible to ignore. He had won the battle in court, but lost the stability that made winning worthwhile. By the time he realized the consequences weren't temporary, they were already embedded in his daily life. Stress, loneliness, resentment, and regret became his new normal. There was no single moment of collapse, just a slow realization that everything he fought so hard to keep was costing him far more than he ever imagined. The moment of understanding didn't come with an apology or a dramatic confession. It came quietly, the way truth often does when there's nowhere left to run from it. It happened on an ordinary evening, in a house that no longer felt like a prize, but like a reminder. He sat alone, surrounded by the very things he had fought so hard to keep. And for the first time, they offered him nothing. No sense of victory, no comfort, no reassurance, just the space, silence, and the weight of realization settling in. He began replaying memories he had once dismissed as insignificant, the routines he never noticed. The stability he assumed was automatic, the way life seemed easier without him ever questioning why. For the first time, he connected the dots he had ignored for years. The calm he once had wasn't luck. It wasn't strength. It was partnership, and in his determination to win, he had dismantled the one thing that made his life function with ease. Regret didn't strike as panic. It arrived as clarity, as slow, aching awareness that some losses cannot be reversed, no matter how much time or money you have. He understood then that what he took in the divorce wasn't mine to begin with. He took the structure I built, the patience I gave, the emotional labor I carried silently. And without those, everything else was just a shell. He thought about reaching out. The idea crossed his mind more than once. But every time, it stopped short of action. What would he say? That he finally understood. That he wished he had seen my value before it became absence. Some realizations come too late to be shared. They are meant to be carried alone, as a lesson rather than a repair. Meanwhile, my life had moved forward in ways he never expected. Not dramatically, not loudly, but genuinely. I had built something new from the ground up, something lighter, healthier, and honest. I no longer measured my worth by what I could hold together for someone else. I didn't need restitution or acknowledgement. I had already reclaimed what mattered most. When he finally accepted the truth, it wasn't about losing me. It was about realizing that he had lost the version of himself that knew how to exist in connection rather than control. The irony was cruel. In trying to secure everything, he had isolated himself from the very things that gave life meaning. And there was no legal process, no negotiation, no appeal that could undo that. That was the moment he understood what he had really taken and what he had lost forever. Not a house, not money, not assets, but the quiet strength of a partnership that once made everything feel possible. And by the time that truth became clear, it had already become permanent. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe. These are real lives, real lessons, and real endings.